Do-do-do-do, it's Camdork.
Hello everyone, this is Chemdork, and welcome to episode 7 of our Kerbal Space Program playthrough. Last episode we landed on Minmus, which is a wonderful achievement, and we also returned back to Kerbal Space Center. Today in this episode we're going to be doing something that is actually, should be, quite difficult. In fact, harder than what we did before, because right now in this episode we're going to meet up with a spacecraft in orbit. And the reason why I say this should be more difficult is because a spacecraft is pretty tiny, a lot smaller than a moon, and we landed on that moon no problem. The moon also pulled us toward it with its gravity, yada yada yada. In Kerbal Space Program, and in space in general, your tiny spacecraft meeting up with another tiny spacecraft in the vast expanse of space seems to be difficult. And in fact, it is, unless you have kind of a way of knowing how to do it. So I'm going to try to teach you in this episode how to do that, or how I do that usually, which is kind of efficient usually. I try to be as efficient as possible, but I try to also be practical and kind of easy. So like most of the things in which how I play this game, I tend to do things kind of practical, or at least kind of efficient, I should say, but pretty much practical. Okay, so let's get to it. So let us meet up with a thing in orbit. And the best way to do this and learn is to rescue Kerbals from orbit. So we have a contract here from Kerbodyne Industries, and it's to rescue Kerbin, who is stranded in low Kerbin orbit. Poor guy. The poor guy, Kerbin, we have to return him safely to Kerbin. So these one-star, low Kerbin orbit rescue missions, they gave us some cash, but really what we're also going to get is experience in how to rendezvous with something, and which is what it's called when you meet up with another spacecraft in space. It's a rendezvous. Also, it's going to be an important skill, but it is also going to give us a Kerbal in our space program. So Derman is going to join us, which I'm really excited about. So the first thing we need to do is see where he is. So let's go ahead and see where he is. So all of these rescue missions, these one-star rescue missions, are pretty simple. In fact, that the guys are always in. So this is Derman's pod. It's his derelict spacecraft. It's in a low Kerbin orbit, and it is in a circular as well as equatorial orbit. So it's actually pretty easy to get into a same type of orbit that Derman is already in. So it's the easiest case. It is a great way to learn how to do this. We're going to actually intentionally get into an orbit that's not quite perfect. And there is a technique you can use to get a lot closer than we will. And I'll tell you how to do that, but we're actually not going to do that in this episode, and the reason why is because I want to be a little farther off the orbit, so that we get to see how I would normally catch up to something if I'm going to try to intercept an orbit of, let's just say, a space station that's around Minmus, which is probably what we're going to be doing and building a little later. And for Rendezvous, this is not docking, this is not actually connecting spacecraft in space, it's just getting them real close, and then relatively kind of zero velocity relative to one another. So how are we going to catch up with Derman in his pod? He's got a periapsis of 78 or 79 kilometers and an apoapsis of, let's just say, 85 kilometers. So it's a roughly circular but kind of skewed orbit. All right, so let's just build a spacecraft that can get into low Kerbin orbit, really, and can also rescue Derman. So the only difference between this spacecraft we're going to build is that we're going to start with a probe core instead of a Mk1 command pod. The probe core is because this is going to be an unmanned spacecraft. We're going to then attach below that an Mk1 command pod, but this, however, is going to be empty. So let's get rid of the crew right there. It's empty seat right now. Okay, and then from here, we're just going to build the spacecraft as normal. And the reason why I'm doing this in fast mode is because you've seen me, where I'm speeding up this part, because we've seen me do this before. So pretty simple design. We are using a pretty standard design we've used before. Okay, well, we are not actually going to launch just yet, so I want to tell you, well, how would you launch into an orbit to be pretty close to Derman's craft? Well, if we look at Kerbal Space Center, it's basically right here. It's right on the equator. So that's why when we launch 90 degrees, sort of at a heading of 90 degrees, we go right into an equatorial orbit. So that's what we're going to be doing from Kerbal Space Center. But we actually want to time it. Normally, you want to time it so that when you launch here and you're at this place in the orbit, you actually are the same place where Dermin's pod is. And that would normally be when Dermin is right about over here. That's usually a good place to start to launch when they're in a pretty low orbit. Obviously, if they're higher in orbit, you want to launch a little bit earlier. If they're lower, you want to launch, well, he's not going to be much lower. So it's around there. But you know what? Since I want to be in an orbit that is just kind of whatever, I'm going to launch right now. So let's go ahead and launch right now. It doesn't really matter anyways. Only thing you really save yourself in is really the time. That's it. So we are just going to launch straight away into a normal orbit. We've done this before a bunch of times, so I'm just going to speed up through this section. You have seen me get into this type of orbit before, so like I said, nothing special here. We're just going to do our normal gravity turn to the right, which is at a 90-degree heading, putting us in a low Kerbin orbit that is equatorial. So, no big deal. The only thing that I will do slightly different is that near the end, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be skewing my orbit kind of intentionally off of to a little bit of an inclination. And the reason is because I want to show you guys how we are going to adjust our orbit to be back into a pretty good inclination to match that of Dermin's. It's just useful as a technique to know. And we'll just be making a minor adjustment anyway, so it's not really a big deal. And there we are, guys. We are in orbit. Look at that orbit. It is just in orbit, and it is quite good. We did great on our fuel economy there. One of the better orbits that I got into. But of course, it's actually skewed in a way very close to what Dermin's is. As you see, the orbit is very, very close. In this case, if I look at Dermin's craft, he's way ahead of us in his orbit. So if I set that as target, we can see his periapsis is, like I said, 79 kilometers, 78.96, and we are 70.298 in around the similar area. So we're roughly inside his periapsis. And on the apoapsis side of things, our apoapsis is 83.899, and his is 84. So we're inside his apoapsis as well. So we're inside his orbit, just a little bit, not much. And we are, as you see, wrong in terms of the inclination. As I mentioned to you, we were going intentionally. I went up as it is on this dial, which is actually close to 180, so it's south. So that's why we were heading. Remember, we put that south vector on our spacecraft when we were right about here. So that's why when we see the inclination change, it's basically this is around where our pivot point was, because we feel the biggest impact of that south at 90 degrees, which is right around here. So what we're going to do first is we're going to match our inclination. So we're going to go to the ascending node here, which is soon. Hold on. Which is soon. We're going to have to head north. So let's add a maneuver at the ascending node. And let's do this. We've kind of done this before, right? We've done this a few times before. So if we do this and we just go like here, we keep the ascending node in our minds. Here we go. Come on, ascending node. Jeez. Okay, let's put the descending node instead, so that way we can see what happens to it. So you see, okay, if I head north, it's going down. At the ascending node, our orbit is going up relative to his, so therefore we actually do want to go down. Never mind. So let's go down, and it'll be right about there. Okay, so right about 55 meters per second. It's actually fairly significant, 8-second burn. That's quite significant when you think about it, right? So, and it's only a very small adjustment. It's a 1.5 degree adjustment. By the way, I did also put some solar panels on this craft because it's pretty important that we notice that if we're running out of power. So let me just go ahead and warp to that maneuver, and we will adjust our inclination. And from there on out, we have to figure out how we're actually going to meet up with this guy, because Dermin has been waiting here for goodness knows how long. Luckily he is a Kerbal, and Kerbals are, well, they're indestructible. Well, now they're not indestructible, but they can live forever in space, which is a pretty awesome trait. It must be really, really boring, though, however, to be a Kerbal. So, anyways, we're just gonna do that, and I think we should be pretty good now. Our yep. Descending and ascending node are 0, so we are in a coplanar orbit with our good friend Dermin. And right here we see our apoapsis is 84.78. His is 83, so we are just outside his, aren't we? Yeah, we're actually no, this is his. I'm sorry, that's ours. We're just inside. If we just look, well, it's kind of like we're kind of inside. You see, we're actually outside his. We're outside his over there. It's just not quite right. The orbit is just not quite right. We're inside his very clearly in the periapsis, but not on the apoapsis. So what I actually want to do is, there's a few different ways to actually meet up with Dermin. And one of the easy ways is to, well, first of all, we get into a coplanar orbit, which is what we are. And now we actually need to be in the same place that he is, relative to his orbit. And what I like to do is set my orbit just barely inside or just barely outside of the target spacecraft. And what that does is it allows us to just use time to catch up. It's just going to be a number of orbits before we finally catch up to where Dermin is. And the reason why that is because there's a very good principle that you should learn, which is that given two spacecraft, so let's see our spacecraft, Rescue 1, and Dermin's pod. So Dermin, if his orbit is just inside ours, he'll be going faster relative to us on the orbital path. Basically, and vice versa, since we're outside his orbit, since we're at a higher altitude orbit, we will generally be going slower. Now, it's not talking about speed. I'm actually talking about, in terms of slower, I mean it takes us longer to complete one orbit compared to Dermin if we are at a higher orbit. And it makes sense when you think about it, because just think of a racetrack. There's a reason why the cars and runners tend to go on the inside of the track, because it's shorter distance. If you go on the outside, well, it's a longer distance to travel, and you have to go faster in order to be going around the track at the same amount of time. And yes, we're going a little bit faster if we're going at a higher altitude, if it's a perfectly circular orbit. However, we're not going fast enough to make up for the extra distance that we have to travel. Hope that kind of makes sense. But general principle is, if you have two objects that are orbiting the same body in a circular orbit, the one at the lower altitude orbit is going to be going faster than the one at the higher orbit. So since we do want to catch up with him, we can either be going faster or slower. It doesn't really matter, because we can just speed up time until we match our orbits. So as it is, we are going inside Dermin's orbit on the one side near his periapsis. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to match up. And we're really close to his periapsis. So I'm actually just going to warp right here to where we're roughly on the same area as his periapsis. Because what I want to do is get my periapsis and apoapsis kind of similar to his. And the easy way to do that is just to kind of burn at the periapsis. Since our periapsis is over this side towards his, we can actually burn over here in a retrograde direction. But what I am going to do is I'm going to burn really kind of right over here, just right over here. And as I do that, you'll see that what happens is our apoapsis will start to get, oops. Well, we're actually coming up to it, so that's too quick. Yeah, what happens is when we do that, our apoapsis starts to, well, we're starting to deorbit, so we don't want to do that. All right, well, now it's the next time around, so hold on a second. Let's cut it. Okay, let's do this the next orbit. Okay, so we're going to do it the next orbit around. And I think actually, is our apoapsis higher than his? Our apoapsis is, just a minute, hold on, wait. If I unset target, okay, that's our apoapsis, got it. Okay, so our apoapsis is 83.85. I want to set as target. His apoapsis is 84. Okay, so we actually want to be, well, our apoapsis is okay. So what we want to do is we want to probably just adjust with maybe even the blues here. Let's see. Okay, that's moving us in the right direction. That's good. So if we move in the right direction, we want to get the whoops. We want to get the apoapsis and periapsis around the same place. So right, yep, there we go. The blues. This is where the blues actually come into play. So you see, we're actually around the same place. We're not really that close though in where we are. So if I go a little bit higher, you see our apoapsis is moving up relative to his, and I want to be really close to his. I want to be like 80... I want to be within a kilometer, if I can. And what that means is that it'll be... I mean... Yeah, and I totally can. So that's pretty good. So if we do that, and our new periapsis will be also pretty close to his, so let's go ahead and warp to the next maneuver. But if we're within a kilometer of our orbit, so our orbits are really close to each other, right? It's like two rings that are super close. So no matter where we are on this orbit, we're always going to be, if we're right next to each other on the orbital path, we're already going to be within a kilometer. That's pretty cool. Now you can use maneuver nodes to adjust things, and usually what happens is I get pretty close and then I'm like, ooh, actually it's a little farther off than I thought I would be. And then I just use a maneuver node to do that fine-tune adjustment, and then finally we'll do our final approach using the horizon indicator on the bottom here. So it's only a 1 second burn, just a little bit of an adjustment here. And that's a combination of a radial burn. Actually, it was a combination of radial and retrograde or prograde. I don't remember which direction. It's not always going to be the same. You're going to have to play around a bit. But usually what I do is play around, if I'm going to do it this way, play around near the periapsis or the apoapsis, wherever I want to be. Just pick one of those, periapsis or apoapsis of the target spacecraft, and just try to get your periapsis or apoapsis similar. So if I do that, our apoapsis, or our periapsis is now 3 kilometers within 3 kilometers of one another, and our periapsis is within 1. Or just about. Good enough. Close enough. So now, we're catching up to him? Well, let's see. So in this case, you notice how we see these like orange thingies? These are the intersect points. And this indicates when we're going to have the closest intersect in this orbit. So in this orbit, he's going to be right here, and we're going to be right here, and we're going to be more than 1,000 kilometers away from one another. Holy crap. If we add a maneuver, and I right-click on a maneuver, you get this thing. You've seen this before when I've canceled a maneuver, but these buttons down here actually show you what it's going to be like the next orbit. You can actually set a maneuver node saying, not this orbit, but the next orbit I want to set in a maneuver node. And when you do that, it also changes these. So let's see what happens. And they actually get a little closer. And when I keep going, and keep going, and keep going, and keep going, and keep going, it gets even closer. Now, we can just do this, or what we can do is the fun way, which is what I like to do. Just go to the tracking station. And let's go ahead and look at the polar view. So here's Dermin, and here's us. We are just inside Dermin's spacecraft, so that means that's why each time around, we're going to be going a little bit faster than he will. We're going to be completing one orbit a little bit quicker than he does. A little bit sooner than he does. Our period in our orbit, which is the amount of time it takes you to orbit, is less than his. So I'm just going to let this kind of speed around, and as it's going here, you'll notice that we get closer and closer and closer. And pretty soon, when we're pretty much right on top of one another, I'll go back to flying our spacecraft and see just how far away we are. And if we're within a kilometer, we're actually pretty good. If we're a little farther than that, however, well, we'll make some minor adjustments, don't you worry. So let's go ahead. I think we got a little more to go. A little more to go, or did we already pass? No, that's Rescue 1. Okay, keep going. So we've been in space only 45 minutes. That's okay. In real time. We're almost there. Oh. Okay, we've surpassed Dermin. Oh no! Well, yeah, okay. So we didn't do this perfectly, but that's okay. Again, that's the point. Oh no, we didn't do it perfectly. Now we could go around again and again and again. But that would be annoying, right? So what would be nice is, okay, if we got out of this darkness here, but now you see we have an intercept point right here that's 39 kilometers. It's not that close, but it's not that far. Let's just put a random maneuver node somewhere and see if we can get this closer. So let's see. We do that, we actually, our separation is, whoops, let's see if I can, there we go. Our separation here is 69.4. As we adjust this way, we do get... Okay, so as I do a prograde burn right over here, you start to get closer and closer and closer until finally... Oh, it seems to change things around. So what we can do is... Oh, wait, we actually now have a second intercept point. So let's see which one gets closer. All right, we're getting some that are getting closer and closer. And hey, look at that. Wait. Ah, hey, look at that. We actually get one that's 0.2 kilometers away if we do a prograde burn at this maneuver node. And that's generally what I do. And you see it's only 11 meters per second. It says NA burn time because it has no idea what our spacecraft can do now that it's come back from the tracking station. It's like, I totally forgot everything there was to know about your spacecraft. So, I don't know what it can do. So we'll just go ahead and warp to the next maneuver. It's only 11 meters per second. It's not a huge burn. So when we do that, we're going to be able to see... So what I'm going to do is darn it. Okay. I got rid of my maneuver node. Oh, darn it. Okay, well, let's just go ahead and burn her here and see what happens. We're going to get close. Hold on. Let's do this. Let's see. We're getting close. 45, 43. And if we're not close enough, then we're just going to do set another maneuver node because I'm a dummy and I got rid of it. Okay, you know what? That's within a kilometer. We are going to be awesome. Okay, so now we're all set. We're going to be within a kilometer, but we're going to be going relative to one another 20.2 meters per second. You might say, Chemdork, within a kilometer is okay, but that's not like right next to each other. How do we do that? And how do we slow down? Well, that is the final approach, which is the last part about Rendezvous. So in order to prepare for that, we're gonna warp right over here. Unfortunately, we are going to be intercepting them on the dark side of the planet, so we won't be able to see much. But that's okay. What we want to see is this bottom thing down here. Now you notice it's set to target mode right here. We can keep clicking this and say surface, target, or orbit. Our speed is shown relative to that. So our orbital velocity is 2246 meters a second. Our surface velocity, relative, our ground speed, if you will, is 20,057, so it's different. And our target velocity is 29.4. What does that mean? It means we're actually traveling relative to this target, which is Derman's craft, at 29 meters a second, roughly. And it's slowing down a bit. And our time to intercept is 3 minutes. So in 3 minutes, we'll be 0.6 kilometers away from Derman's craft, enough to wave hello and him have binoculars and a really good telescope, I suppose, to see us. But otherwise we won't be able to see each other. So how do we get closer? Well, that's why we have to look at these things that you see down here. So there is a prograde vector, and there's also a retrograde vector, but the blue things, the radials, are gone. Because only what you really need to be knowing is prograde and retrograde. And then there's two pink things. There's a pink thing that looks like a circle, and there's a pink thing that looks like an X, pretty much. Yeah, it's kind of like a Y. And this basically shows you the pink thing that looks like a circle means that you're pointed at the target spacecraft. When you are pointing yourself at the pink thing that looks like a Y, that means you're pointing completely directly away from the spacecraft. And what you basically need to know is that if your prograde vector is overlapped with the circle, that means your direction in which you're traveling relative to the target is exactly where the target is. So you're going directly at the target. So when you're approaching the target, you want to have those two overlap. And likewise, you want to have your retrograde overlap directly with this kind of retro pointer. I don't know what you call it, but when you're pointed directly away from the target. So I'll just show you that right now. So here you go. We don't have crazy amounts of electric charge, so I'm gonna show you. So I'm gonna point at the target, and we're gonna look in this space mode. You see how I'm pointing to the it'll be this way, the way you guys are looking at it. So I'm pointing this way. So what is over there? Let's see. Look at that, 1.8 kilometers away. It's Derman's pod, and we're pointing directly at his pod. So what we want to do is we want to pull this prograde vector a little bit toward Derman's pod. Of course, as we do that, if we do a burn, say like right over here, it's going to pull it. The problem is we actually are getting a lot closer to Derman, and we're kind of a little bit too fast. We want to slow down. So what we want to actually do is think of it the other way. We want to push the retrograde vector toward his pod. And remember, I think I've told you this, guys, before, when you're... Oh, we actually have to do this quickly. So when you're looking at your retrograde vector, you're basically pushing it away. When you're looking at your prograde vector, you're pulling it away. So I'm just going to slow us down a lot. We're going to point retrograde, and we're going to slow us down. So we're going really slow. And now we're approaching where our retrograde vector is pointed directly away from him. And we're still approaching him, as you see, this number's going down. 2.3 meters a second. This is really, really kind of like a nice la 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 la, we're getting closer and closer. And this will get us absolutely there, where we need to be, quite easily. If we wanted to speed this up, we could always go point here, and if we wanted to say, that, oh, look, we're not exactly pointing toward him, which is... so we want to actually pull our prograde vector toward where he is. So you see, when we do that, we go over here, we're kind of like pulling it along. What I generally say is 10 meters a second, as you get good at this, 10 meters a second is right around where 1,000 meters, like if I'm about 1,000 meters away, 10 meters a second is a good approach speed. As you get 500 meters a second, it's like 500. 5 meters a second is good for 500 meters away, and kind of likewise, and then anything below that is like 2 meters a second. That's kind of my general thing. So we see 3 meters a second is actually kind of slow. It doesn't really matter, but it's just a good rule of thumb that I use, because otherwise you're going to be like doing fine-tune adjustments here like crazy. So I'm going to keep out like 5.5 meters a second. And now from here on out, since we're pretty much pointed in the right direction and pretty much going at a good speed, I'm going to point myself away here, and I got to be careful because I don't have a lot of electrical charge. So I am going to actually kind of run my engine a bit here. And I'm going to push this toward, and as I do this, I'm trying to push this exactly toward there. So there we go. I'm actually going to take off SAS because it's only going to use our electricity. But you see, this is like the Stay-Putnik probe, that circular probe. It has no SAS, and it makes intercepting some of these things really, really a pain in the butt. So I highly recommend not using that one. It's just tough to use, especially if you're not used to this sort of thing. It's very tough to use. Okay, so let's be careful here. I really wish we were in the sun because that would be a lot better. There we go. So I'm going everywhere, all over the place with the speed, but that's just because I want to generate some electricity, because we are out of electricity. Alright, so we are still approaching him. I'm going to be approaching him at a reasonable clip, because I'm out of electricity. Totally out. I hope we have enough to last. I hope we have enough to intercept. I really do, guys. So here we're approaching really quite fast, but that's okay. We can just slow down pretty easily. Pretty easily. Pretty easily. There we go. Come on. Come on. 8.4. We're 200 meters away. We're so close. What is that thing over there? Oh, is that? Yeah, that must be the moon, I think, or Minmus. It's one of those guys. Alright, now we're 100 meters away. Okay, I gotta engage SAS because I've been little fine adjustments here. 86, so we're under 100. So there we go. Let's cut our speed pretty drastically. We're within 1 meter a second away, and we have very precious little fuel left. So here we go. All right, a precious little electrical charge left. We can put batteries on this. This might be a good idea for you guys the first time you do this, is to put batteries on it. Or you just match up in the sun. So we're about 60 meters away. That's not too bad for a spacewalk. Whoops. Let's do this so that... Oh, okay, our relative velocity is basically 0. So there we go. So we're there. Dermin's pod is only 60 meters away. So let's take off SAS because we're going to have to at some point. So how do we get Dermin on board? Well, he's got to do a spacewalk. How do we get to him? You push the bracket key, and that switches to a nearby craft. And here's Dermin. Dermin is happy as all get out because he is able to leave. So, okay, we obviously just let go. All right, Dermin, come on. Come on, let's turn on your lights. And let's head toward that thing. That is Rescue 1. Okay, so let's do our spacewalk. So EVA, if you're not really good at EVAs, just kind of play with it. It's eventually you'll get it, and it's not too difficult. So anything within 100 meters is actually quite easy to do in EVA. So here we go. We're approaching. Just gotta make sure you line up with the door, and we're gonna save this Kerbal. Let's see where are we going? Right there. There's the door, and yeah, I can't really angle him properly. Actually, I think I can angle him. There's a view modes. Right, yeah, free. That's the camera angle I want. There you go. Okay. And we'll just have him grab on. Okay, Dermin, get on board. Congratulations, Dermin, you're on a spacecraft with no electrical charge left. Let's take it off of target mode, and let's just head home. We know how to do this. Just head home. So let's, well, we'll unset our target in a minute, but pretty soon we'll just get this periapsis below. There we go. Let's set it at like 20. Oh, good. Okay, so we'll head home. So the rest of it we've done before. We have tons of fuel left, as you see. This is just kind of for your first time around. I would highly recommend building something like this, perhaps with 2 batteries on it. That way you can have a lot more room to maneuver and stuff with your electrical charge. You don't have to do such a crazy approach as I do. But this is basically the idea about Rendezvous. It's not too bad, but you do want to practice it a bit. So let's go ahead and get back into the atmosphere, and I'm actually just gonna go through this pretty quickly because we've done this before, and this time around it's no different from any of the other times we've done it. And thanks a lot, guys. So I highly recommend you just kind of play around with Rendezvous. You can get a lot of these quests or these contracts, and just play around. Honestly, you'll eventually get it. It's not going to be too difficult. Eventually, you're going to be a pro at it. Don't you worry. But it does take a little bit of practice because it's not something that's instantaneously easy to really learn how to do. And that's okay. That's okay. A lot of things in Kerbal Space Program, you do have to practice a bit at it. But now that you've been armed with the knowledge of generally how you do these things, you should be an awesome pro. And there you have it. So we have returned home from rescuing Dermin Kerbin, but more importantly, we have just learned exactly what it means to rendezvous and have learned basically good techniques that we can use for later down the line. So thanks guys for watching. That was episode 7. In episode 8, I think it's probably time maybe we head to the moon. Maybe we'll start to build a space station. Don't really know. Maybe it depends on what our contracts are, so we'll go ahead and look at them a bit. And by the way, we still haven't spent this 750 science that we got from last mission. So let's go ahead and do that next episode and see where it takes us. Okay guys, thanks for watching and take care. Bye-bye now.